Okay guys, welcome back to the channel. This is going to be part 2 of my Florida Audio Expo 2022 review and recap. And today I'm just going to focus on the rooms that were my best in show. And I know that's something that's always popular, but let me talk about one thing before I even do it. Number one, there's going to be a best room and best sound. I'm kind of teasing you here, but you're going to understand why when I get through this and I explain it a little more. But let me also preface this by saying I see all the time in the past people give awards for best in show, and I've been at these shows. There's always going to be disagreement. So feel free to chime in if you disagree. I understand. All of this is dependent on your anecdotal preferences and experiences at the time. If you were in the sweet spot, not the sweet spot, they're playing music you like, you don't like, are they playing the volume you want, not the volume you want, is the noise floor good or bad? There's so many variables, and just to make sure you don't make the same mistakes I make, or let me just tell you the learning curve I went through. I went to shows early on and I knew nothing, and everything was better than what I had, and I was like envious but intimidated and believed anything people told me. As you go on, you get better gear yourself, you learn how to improve your room, you may even use DSP, you start getting better stuff and better sound, and then you go to these shows and you realize, oh, I'm in that ballpark, and there's only a few things that stand out to you. And then you go back again and you realize, after you spent a lot of time in your room and with different types of gear over the years, you realize how much is not really the gear, it's your room and setup and all those kind of things that go into it that change, and not the gear so much. And so then you go to the shows and realize that's the same thing you're hearing here. You'll hear Magico one time sound great, maybe less good another time. Wilson's great here, not so good this time. And it's not the gear really changing as much as it is the room, the setup, all these other factors I just mentioned, the song they're playing, the volume. And I'll tell you, if I had one thing to nitpick at this whole show, so many rooms I went into were playing way too low. I mean, you really can't test a speaker or a system if it's at like elevator music. And it wasn't because they were talking or trying to do business in the room at the time. Everybody was quiet, and that they just didn't want to raise the volume. But that also piggybacks into what is my number one room, because one thing I'll tell you is that dynamics and volume are something that people overlook. So many people say, oh, I don't like to listen loud. I have a threshold at 75, 80, maybe 85. But sometimes your preference and where you think you land is because the gear you've had has never allowed you to enjoy it much higher, because that's the constraints of the driver excursion, your amplifier, your room. When you can hear it limitless in terms of dynamics and pleasing and smooth, and the amplifier can deliver all the power that's needed, and the speakers can fill the room without feeling strained, that's a huge advantage, because then your favorite songs can be played super loud, and that wows you. And so that's why MBL Extremes Mark II, that is my favorite room and has been one of my favorite speakers, because the limitless dynamics are incredible. And that really is the thing that elevates them among so many others. Their omnidirectional presentation, understandable, can be polarizing. They wouldn't work in my room, and I'm a solo seater listener in a sweet spot. So I might not even like them long term, but I could appreciate the dynamics in their presentation, just filling the room, height, limitless height. Again, you can nitpick, oh, it's not as precise as this kind of point source speaker. Granted, all those criticisms are fine. This is part of your preference thing. But in terms of judging a speaker, in terms of a ceiling, a wow factor, aesthetically, just everything involved, I thought that was the best room. And here's the litmus test that really did it for me, is that people were not leaving that room in the middle of songs. And they were playing stuff that wasn't audiophile all the time, and they were playing at a high level. And on top of people not leaving, a lot of people were moving their head, tapping their toes, which is a subliminal thing you can't, fake. And I was even doing that to songs I don't even like. So when I can sit there and nitpick and be the hypercritical audiophile, understandable, but I don't think that's the way to go into these shows, because then everything can be criticized. It's not a perfect setup. And so that was why I rank that one the best. I think people stayed in it the longest, enjoyed it, and pretty much they could play any type of music, any volume level, and you will get a wow factor. Now, the other big rooms were all right up there too, and I can see people, depending on if they don't like MBL omnidirectional presentation, choosing one of those other ones. And they had ceilings that were super high. I would put the Borison next on the list of my favorite. They have a super high ceiling. Those drivers are incredible, especially that tweeter and cabinet construction. Everything in that was very good room. I wasn't familiar with the material, so A-Bing it is hard. And that was the one that most people ask me, how does it compare to your extremes? Because it's got the driver arrays and whatnot. And so let me talk about that real quick. It's an easy comparison in terms of value. I mean, we're talking about a $200,000 speaker to $10,000 or less do-it-yourself. Does the Borison have better drivers? No question. Cabinet construction, probably a lot better cabinet construction. Is the ceiling of that speaker higher than if I brought them in my room? Right now, I probably prefer what I'm getting in my room than what I heard at the show at the Borison. But it had such a high ceiling and potential from what I heard. If I put it in here, could I get an even higher performance level in my room? Probably so, and I should at $200,000. But it's an easy choice for me on a value judgment, and then equally, it's probably an easy choice for me if money's no object. Yeah, I'd rather have that ribbon tweeter for sure than the planer. And those other drivers are all super high end. Some of these drivers on the extremes are the best compromise for a great budget. But the one thing that's also, is it's still not a slam dunk that I guarantee the Boris, I keep trying to call it Rido, that's the previous iteration, but the lineage of that speaker. Many people probably remember Ridos looking like the Borison. But, and I got a really good props for Borison that I'm going to give at the very end when I talk about best sound in the show. So hopefully I'll remember to come back to that. But yeah, I'm very impressed with Borison and the Avic electronics. My friend Mark took those home to demo in his home. So hopefully I'll have some feedback for you on that. The Vivid Room was probably my friend Doug's favorite, second favorite after MBL's. He had a video, if you want to watch that video, his thoughts. And I would agree. I've heard Vivid many times, and that was probably the best I've heard them. Probably a compliment to the block amplification and preamp that they were using, as well as good setup by Suncoast Audio. Very well done room. I can easily see people liking that room. The Von Schweikert, semi-disappointing for me, not because the sound was bad per se. I was just hoping they brought their big ones to compete with the MBL Extremes that they normally bring. And it looked like they rented the room for those big ones, but for whatever reason, they didn't bring them. And so a little bit disappointed I didn't get to hear those again in an A-B comparison with the Extremes. But the Von Schweikert in general has always been one of my preeminent brands in terms of point source box speakers that I would ever consider if I went back to point source box speakers. And nothing I heard dissuaded me from that at this show. The other one, Acora had the biggest room, and I mentioned them in the prior. I would put them a tier behind the Vivid, Borison, Von Schweikert, and obviously MBL. And then the classic audio reproductions, horns with the Purist Audio cables. That was a great room too. But again, not really my personal flavor, but a lot of people spent a lot of time in there, enjoyed that. So again, I can see people elevating that one very high as well. All the big rooms, I think, were winners, and you would be impressed no matter what you have at home with what you heard. You can nitpick each and every room, like I said, but in terms of being impressed by certain things you heard, I'm pretty sure you did hear something impressive in all of those rooms. Now, in terms of the smaller rooms, I would say if I had to go back to another room just to listen blind, from what I heard, I would say the Magico Cat room, Convergent Audio Technology, they've been around forever. And they did it. That was a great room. And Magico's always got a high ceiling with their stuff. Now, have I gone to shows where Magico sounded better? Yes, with a much bigger room and different models. I've heard it even sound better. I've heard it sound worse too. And that goes back to what I'm saying. Don't take any conclusions when I say that MBL is always going to be better than Borison or whatever. You have to be able to parse what you're hearing to the specifics of where you were, the room, and what you were hearing at the time, the type of music and whatnot, and the associated electronics. Okay, also, the small rooms. The one room that got a lot of scuttlebutt, I remember on the first day, was Lampizator, and I would agree, it was a great room. I spent some time in there. I've had Lampizator products before, their DAC, Big 7 balance DAC, and their server, and so I do like that room. Some of the other ones, RBH, I didn't mention them in the previous video. They had probably the best bass of any of the small rooms, and they did have DSP, which probably helped them get rid of that common 150, 200 bump that was kind of prevalent in a lot of rooms, and some other issues in the bass that were common with those small size rooms. They didn't really have it, and when you hear bass done right, you know, oh, this is so much different than any other room I went in. Now, tilted, the top end was a little tilted up, I thought, or could have been tilted down a bit to my preference for DSP, but for that person's ears that was running the room, it might have been perfect. I'm just saying that's basically because it has DSP and active crossover and whatnot, it has such a high ceiling that everything I heard there, and aesthetically really impressive. So I think in one of those, if you had those RBH down in the big rooms down there, it would have been right up there with the other rooms I just mentioned. So I'm going to give a shout out to those rooms. But again, on par, almost every room at the show was done a quality job with what they were dealt with. I didn't hear only one room that was disappointing, actually had some distortion. And I decided not even to film or release any of the film from that room because I didn't want to. It was the first day and I never got a chance to go back. Maybe they solved the issue, but it was just not good at all. And hopefully they got it solved, but I didn't feel it was fair to release that video first day of setup. And I didn't want to make conclusions unless I had a chance to go back. I didn't have a chance to go back. But that was the only room that I said, well, I wouldn't even think of buying the stuff in there. All the other rooms I went into, depending on your preferences and what subjectively you like aesthetically and what kind of ceiling you're looking for, you had so many great options and so many new brands that I haven't seen before. And that previous video I did is really the one you really should watch because those brands deserve a lot of credit for what they were able to do. First show back, small hotel room. Those brands deserve a lot of credit just as much as these ones that put the audio porn quality systems that cost no object. And unfortunately, I'm going to keep doing, I like the feedback I've been getting from you guys on how I uploaded stream conscious kind of videos where you got the feeling of being there. That's what Luis at 3MA told me and a lot of others. I'm going to keep that format when I go to Expona. But I was disappointed. There's going to be enough people doing the pictures and the 1 or 2 paragraph write-off on a bunch of rooms. But I saw some of the press not doing a whole lot. And in particular, one was only there one day that should have been doing a whole lot more. And, you know, these rooms, these smaller rooms deserve a lot of credit and they deserve press from outlets bigger than me. I'm just a small guy, total amateur, not even doing this for profession. So hopefully we'll see some good reports out on these smaller rooms, but definitely watch my previous video on big surprises if you haven't. Now, I've been holding this to the end. What was the best sound at the show I heard? And the reason why I categorize it as best sound at the show and not best room is because it was a headphone setup. And it was in the head amp room, but it was only one setup in there that was the best sound pretty much I've ever heard. You know, and it would have made that video I filmed a few weeks ago of what were my memorable experiences in 20 plus years ago on the show. This would have made that video if I had heard this system before that. And it was simply the Blue Hawaii SE amp with, it was like a $6,200 amp with the $6,200 Stax new headphones, the 9,000 model. I forget the model number, but roughly $12,000 headphone setup. So it should be good. But let me tell you, I had never heard the song I played, this Hey Laura song. I've heard it on Extremes. I've heard it on YG. I've heard it on Mega Dollar Systems. And even at this show, they were playing that in different rooms. Never heard certain things I heard on that setup. And it's just the perfect combination of detail, smoothness, sweetness. You know, there's always sometimes, oh, detail, but is that going to be too grating over time? Or is it too sweet, too soft, doesn't have the dynamics? This just, for me, hit the perfect marriage that I've never heard before, anywhere, anytime, on any system, regardless of budget. And I was immediately thinking, ugh, I got to buy this now. You know, $12,000. What am I going to do? You know, am I going to use it in my, you know, I'm not a headphone guy, although I've had Odyssey, the Pandora, the, let's see, Sennheiser. My friend has Sennheisers, the 800s, and the Mod Ride amp. I've heard the Abyss, the Focals, you name it. I'm not a headphone expert, and I don't really use headphones other than for general PC purposes and watching YouTube. But this was so amazing, to my ears at least, that I think I have to get it. So it wins my best sound and show by a huge margin too. And it brings up an issue that I'm going to be talking about in a future video, because now I'm starting to put the pieces together. What rooms have a commonality of that I like, and a headphone takes the room out of the equation. And there's also some rooms that have always stood out to me for a reason, and they have done a good job of taking the room out of the equation, but more than just these primitive setup techniques that everybody likes to do that give a little bit better sound stage and whatnot. There's a next level of understanding this stuff that I'm really starting to understand firsthand with my ears, and it has to do with this interaural crosstalk. The Polk SDA system really opened my eyes to this, and the fact that headphones don't have interaural crosstalk. So not to deviate too much, this will be a separate video, I'll talk about that. But going back to the Borison guys, what gave me a lot of respect for them is that Lars, when he was doing his presentation, mentioned that Borison does not care about what Magico, Wilsons, or whatever sound like. He said, we don't benchmark ourselves against that. We benchmark ourselves against headphones. And if I would not have heard the Blue Hawaii stack setup just about an hour earlier from hearing him, I would have thought this guy's crazy. And, you know, he's got all these little tweaky things that are polarizing, and it's easy to think that Lars is crazy or whatever. I think he's a great guy, very entertaining to listen to. But some of the things can be polarizing. This really gave me respect for what they're doing, because I had just heard exactly why they would say that, because you really cannot benchmark yourself. Nothing I've heard from Magico, Wilson, or whatever could compare to what I heard of that song on the Blue Hawaii Stax headphones. Just, if you want to really benchmark yourself with what's on that recording and how potentially it can sound, that is the new benchmark for me. Everything now is benchmarked to that as the ultimate performance from your floor standing speakers. And you're just never going to be able to do some things because of the room. And so in any case, I'd like to get more material. I couldn't spend a lot of time with the Blue Hawaii and the Stax to hear more different types of music. And that's the one thing that's keeping me from buying. So I really should do my due diligence and not buy off of one song. But if I was ever going to buy a piece of equipment off of just one song, this blew me away so much that that's why it wins my best sound of the show. And that is probably where I'm going to put my money where my mouth is at this show. So, and like I said, a lot of my friends put their money where their mouth is. So our reviews are backed up with money being spent. And so hopefully this has been helpful to you. I'm sure you guys agree, disagree on certain things. Feel free to comment. I have no problem entertaining other thoughts and things that I might not have heard or seen. Feel free to chime in, and I'll be at Expona doing the same thing. So stay tuned, sign up, subscribe, and I'll see you back here soon.